Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at one of the most defining moral and economic questions of our time. We are unpacking the realities facing dreamers and the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy, which, most of us just call DACA. Okay, let's dive into this, because the stakes here, both for hundreds of thousands of individuals and for the broader U.S. economy, are absolutely massive. 27. So that is the average number of years a current DACA recipient has lived in the United States. I mean, just imagine that for a second. Growing up in the only country you've ever really known, going to school, making friends, building a whole life. But then finding out that, legally, you could actually be sent away to a place you barely even remember. That is the deeply rooted reality for these individuals. They're just existing in a system without any permanent status.
All right, let's look at Section 1, Americans on Paper Only, and the reality of DACA recipients.
To really understand this, we have to talk about the concept of liminal legality. It's basically this idea of being recognized by the system just enough to participate in it, but simultaneously being trapped in a temporary state with zero permanent security. So let's clearly define what DACA actually is. Created in 2012 by an executive agency memorandum, it provides temporary relief from deportation plus a work authorization permit. And to even qualify, applicants had to meet some pretty strict criteria. They had to have arrived in the U.S. before turning 16, they must be in school or have graduated, and they absolutely have to maintain a clean criminal record. But crucially, and this is the big catch, it provides absolutely no pathway to citizenship or permanent legal residency.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between DACA and full citizenship. On one side, DACA status is temporary. It requires expensive and, frankly, really stressful renewals every 2 years just to keep a work permit valid. On the other side, you have actual citizenship, permanent stability, voting rights, the ability to travel freely, and qualification for federal jobs. Essentially, DACA recipients are living their lives on a 2-year clock, constantly vulnerable to policy shifts.
To really grasp the scale of all this, let's take a look at the demographics. Right now, there are just over 525,000 active DACA recipients. Their average age is 33. This is a highly educated group too, with 92% holding a high school diploma and over 80% with some college education. And perhaps most importantly, they are deeply, deeply embedded in American communities. We're talking about folks living with nearly 1 million U.S. citizen family members, including spouses and kids. Which brings us to Section 2. Trapped in legal limbo, and the court battles. For over a decade, this whole policy has essentially been volleyed back and forth in the courts. It's a long timeline. The DREAM Act was first introduced way back in 2001. Then, DACA was created as a temporary stopgap in 2012. Fast forward to 2021, and a federal court suddenly halted all first-time applicants. And most recently, in 2025, the Fifth Circuit Court issued rulings in a case called Texas versus U.S., which continues to challenge the very foundations of the program's work authorizations.
This leads us right to a crucial current reality. Right now, if you already have DACA, you can renew it. But first-time applications, they are completely frozen. Because of that 2021 court order, hundreds of thousands of younger, would-be applicants who meet all the original criteria are just locked out. They're entirely unable to access the protections that older dreamers have relied on for years. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3, the human and mental toll, and the true cost of uncertainty. Stepping away from the courtroom for a minute, we can really see the day-to-day psychological and practical nightmare this limbo creates. And this brilliantly illustrates the current administrative crisis. Look at this timeline. A recipient files their renewal perfectly on time, but because median processing wait times have totally skyrocketed, jumping from just 15 days to 70 days, which is a staggering 400% increase, their status officially expires while they wait. The result? Step 3, they instantly lose their job, their income, and their legal status. And it's through absolutely no fault of their own. And remember, behind those administrative delays are real people. Take Cesar, for instance, a DACA recipient. Because his renewal was delayed for 6 months, he lost his dream job working in human resources. To survive and just make ends meet while waiting on the government to process his paperwork, he was actually forced to sell burritos on the street. As he says right there on the screen, "I feel like I lose everything." The risks go even further than lost jobs, though. We are seeing actual deportations. The source material reports on Maria, who actually had active, valid DACA status. She went to an immigration hearing to obtain a green card and was unexpectedly detained. Within 24 hours, she was deported to Mexico, separated from her U.S. citizen daughter, Damaris. And as Damaris describes it,
In that terrible moment, she felt completely helpless, small, and invisible. Moving into Section 4, a trillion-dollar question and forfeiting the dream. Okay, looking at this from a macroeconomic perspective, economists have run the numbers and the estimates are pretty staggering. Ending DACA is projected to cost the U.S. economy up to $1 trillion over the working lifetimes of these recipients. We're talking about the squandered economic contributions of nurses, teachers, and business owners who have been educated and trained right here in the U.S. And these future losses? They'd hit our most critical industries the hardest. We are looking at a $32 billion hit in healthcare, $28 billion in manufacturing, and another $28 billion in retail and wholesale. These are industries already facing historic labor shortages, right? They would be severely crippled without the DACA workforce. But the economic fallout doesn't just hit corporate balance sheets. It creates a massive domino effect that directly devastates American families and local communities. When a DACA recipient loses their ability to work, their entire household's financial stability pretty much collapses right alongside it. So the crucial point is this. If DACA ends, it's not just 440,000 workers forced out of their jobs. It also means an estimated 144,000 U.S. citizen children would be pushed below the poverty line. And ironically, that would end up triggering up to $10 billion in new federal support costs for shelter, food, and healthcare over the next decade, just to support those citizen children. And if you want the absolute maximum estimate of economic loss, well, it's this number, $648 billion. That is the potential future economic loss to the country if all DACA-eligible individuals and their spouses lose their ability to participate in the workforce over their lifetimes. It's just a monumental figure. Finally, Section 5, the legislative path forward, and why only Congress can act. Ultimately, the bottleneck in resolving this crisis isn't actually the courts or the executive branch. Despite how heavily politicized immigration gets on the news, according to recent Gallup polling, public support for Dreamers is overwhelmingly bipartisan. A massive 81% of Americans support allowing immigrants brought to the U.S. as children a chance to become citizens if they meet certain requirements. Only 19% oppose it. And lawmakers have tried to align with that public support for years. We've seen various versions of the DREAM Act introduced from 2001 all the way to 2025. There's the American Dream and Promise Act, plus various bills proposing conditional pathways to lawful permanent residency. Yet, neutrally speaking, none have successfully passed both chambers of Congress to actually become law. Let's move to and see how this builds to a final realization. Only Congress can provide a lasting solution. Executive memos from the president, they can be reversed. Court battles, they can freeze programs indefinitely. But true permanent stability for these hundreds of thousands of people requires actual legislative reform from lawmakers. Which leaves us with this final question to chew on. Can the American dream be sustained when an entire demographic is kept in a permanent state of temporary relief? The human cost is heartbreaking. The economic cost approaches $1 trillion, and the clock is ticking. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.